Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided. This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
Access to Democracy returns. Alan Miller sitting in the interviewing chair. And we have a return guest, but it's been quite a few years since he was last here, and some very interesting stories that have gone on since then. But before we get started on the interview, I would just like to say that we are really grateful. This program runs because of the volunteers. And sometimes we really have a tough time getting volunteers. So we have students from 2220 at Eagan High School who are manning the cameras, and we're really grateful for that. Without Mary Dahlke directing, we would be dead meat. We have Joni Preston, who is at the controls over there, and a big welcome back to Raven, who we have sorely missed in the last month. And although I'm looking in the control room now, I can't see Paul Hoffinger, who's become an important part of our team, and Sharon, and he's waving. And Sharon and I are really grateful for that, because putting this operation together is a chore. And at the end of 17 years and almost 1,800 interviews, we have survived.
More than that.
Now back to today's guest, Richard Logan, the son of a Methodist minister, born in New York, but basically raised in Vermont. And obviously, it's the influence of Bernie that led the son of a Methodist minister to recently become elected as the national head of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. Now, do you want to take us down that path? Because that's an interesting one.
Well, I'd have to think how much credit to give Bernie directly, but certainly, I mean, growing up in Vermont, back when it was rock-ribbed Republican, but it was Republican in the old Northeast Yankee way, whereby some of those Republicans were more liberal than a great many Democrats in U.S. politics and so on. But yes, I've been chosen. I'm tempted to make a joke about how I became president because we drew straws and I lost, but it's not that way at all. In fact, to be elected president of a Jewish organization. It's not entirely Jewish because there are many intercultural marriages among the membership, and there are many humanists like myself who greatly admire Jewish intellectual history and Jewish culture and the Jewish story. To be elected by that group is perhaps the greatest honor of my life. I mean, I retired from my job in academia 10 years ago. I found Humanistic Judaism shortly after retiring, when we moved over here. My wife Carol and I moved over to Minneapolis in 2004, thereabouts, and started going to Or Emet, which is the Minnesota Congregation for Humanistic Judaism. I made the mistake of offering to give some talks and so on, and within a few years I was elected president of Or Emet. And then, and that's a great experience because that is a great group of smart and caring people. And
a lot of academics and a lot of non-academics,
Right.
But an interesting mix of people.
A very interesting mix of people, very stimulating. In fact, I like to tell people that, I had this vision when I got my doctorate and was headed into academia that we would, my colleagues and I would be sitting around on green grass with Greek temples in the background and having very deep conversations about meaningful ideas and so on. But actually it became a job, not entirely, but my vision of the good life in academia is actually more realized by belonging to the group Or Emet and by my wonderful experiences with the Society for Humanistic Judaism.
And now, as the national head, I can't think, and the first, I think, non-Jewish president that they have had.
I think that's true.
Certainly, it's got to be the pinnacle of that. I don't like to say religion because humanistic Judaism is, to me, much more a cultural experience than it is, and I are one, so I mean...
Yes. Well, Humanistic Judaism is really the only congregational movement for secular Jews and for those whose lives have brought them close to secular Jews through marriage or other kinds of experiences.
It's not based on theology.
It is not based on theology. It's based more on, say, the ethics of Baruch Spinoza than it is on the Bible, the Torah, or anything like that. Although we believe very much in Jewish community, we believe very much in Jewish identity. We, both Or Emet and the other congregations in the Society for Humanistic Judaism, observe the traditional rituals and ceremonies as part of the process of doing meaningful things together, keeping historical memory alive, and so on. So anybody who came anybody who's Jewish would recognize, say, our Passover Seder, for example.
But it's, again, very secular.
It is thoroughly secular.
It's not based on religion, which is what appeals to the people who are members. And there's a joke about Judaism. First there was Orthodox Judaism, then there was Conservative Judaism, then there was Reform Judaism, then there was Reconstructionist Judaism, and Humanistic Judaism was only born decades ago.
In the 1960s.
Formed by a rabbi who got away from really Reform Judaism, and you might tell us that story, a little bit of it.
Well, Sherwin Wine had been a Reform rabbi for a number of years. He famously made the cover of Time magazine back in the 1960s with the caption, "The Atheist Rabbi," or something like that. Although I think the word atheist is a little bit overdrawn as a label for him because he's very strictly a humanist. And I think one of the things that led him to make that move out of Reform Judaism was the growing realization on his part and a very large number of his congregation in the Detroit area that the world is the way it is because of what people do. And if you realize that, then humanism rather naturally follows.
And it has grown since that first congregation to now be an international
That's right.
really movement.
There are congregations in Canada, there are affiliate groups in the UK, if there's still going to be a UK, and there are affiliate groups in the UK, Australia, Israel, and
throughout the United States as well.
And dozens throughout the United States. And in the more recent decades, the sister group to the society, which is called the Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism, has been training rabbis, recognized humanistic rabbis with very, very, very strict and high-level training in rabbinical, in the kinds of work that leads
Strict training to become a loose individual.
to become a touchy-feely humanist, right?
Right.
Yes.
So, I mean,
In fact, the group. It's a very, very smart group of people, or it's a group of very, very smart people.
And now I noticed another thing when we were putting up the facts and the credits, that to contact you by email, one has to go to Safari Doc.
Doc Safari.
Or Doc Safari.
Yes, as in
What's-
African safari.
Well, there's got to be a story there.
Well, there is. It's Doc Safari, short for Dr. Safari, and the reason I chose that name, and this is probably, or that email name is goes back close to 30 years now. Back in the 1980s, I started organizing and running safaris to East Africa to take students and various other interested community people to experience the cultural variety and the variety of wildlife and ecological settings in East Africa. So we would go on safaris, and so I took the name Doc Safari. I suppose at some point I'm going to have to get one that says president@shj.org or something, but so far I haven't had any complaints about Doc Safari. But I spent 3 years of my life in East Africa.
And there's a moving forward Africa movement that you were
Yes.
involved in?
I do serve on a couple of other nonprofit boards. One is the board of Moving Forward Africa, which is devoted to providing clean water for villages in rural Kenya. And that's a very rewarding exercise for me to participate in.
You've been published often, but you also authored a book, which I've been privileged to read, which has been optioned for a movie, and that book is a true story. It's called Alone.
That's right.
And you might relate that.
Well, I developed a sideline. You know how it happens sometimes in life that these astonishing coincidences occur that help you move into a whole new, rewarding line of work. I had started in the 1970s doing some work on the psychology of survival because I had been asked to teach a course in the psychology of stress. The textbooks were terrible, but I happened to be reading the story of the Andes plane crash survivors at the time, and I thought, wow, I'm going to have the students who were, by the way, inmates in the correctional institution in Green Bay, Wisconsin, 18 to 25-year-olds. I said, I'm going to have them read real-life survival stories. And by gosh, that was really successful. And it was so successful that I started doing my own research on it. And then a few years later, a student walked into my office and told me she had heard about my work. And she came in and told me this amazing story about how when she was 11 years old, her family, her mother, her father, a younger sister, older brother, had gone on a dream sailing trip through the Bahamas, and she woke up one night to hear her brother screaming, and went out into the main cabin and saw her mother and brother lying dead on the main
deck.
cabin deck. And anyway, to make a long story short, she had to escape the captain, the skipper of this 67-foot yacht. She had to escape the skipper, who apparently was for whatever reason going around killing everybody. So she had to escape him. She had to escape the sinking ship, and she did that literally by seconds. And then she had to survive 4 days floating in a cork float that's about the size of that table. No water, no food.
The captain, and nobody really knows why he became a murderer.
Nobody
But
knows, although...
He went down with the sailboat or not?
Well, actually, no. That's a very interesting part of a very, very interesting story.
That's
that
what I
really,
wanted to get to.
It goes beyond. I mean, if you wrote a novel, if you presented a publisher with a novel with all of the elements that this story has, I'm sure a publisher would say, "Come on, get serious," because it has so many uncanny elements. The captain actually escaped the sinking ship, and he took the ship's dinghy and the ship's life raft with him.
Of course, 4 out of the 5 family members were dead.
And yes, 4 out of the 5 family members were dead. We presume that his wife, who was the other crew on the ship, was also dead, although there isn't direct evidence for some of these other deaths, but no bodies were ever found.
And he sunk the ship.
And he had scuttled the ship, and that was how it came about that Terry Jo, which was her name at that time, 11 years old, spunky young girl from Green Bay, Wisconsin. She had the presence of mind to avoid the captain while the boat was sinking, scurry up onto the deck, recall that there was a float lashed to the main cabin roof. She quickly untied it, and just as she finished untying it, the deck was falling into the depths below her feet. And one of the ropes on the raft actually snagged momentarily on the ship as it was going down. So she was pulled underwater briefly, and then she came back up into complete blackness and complete silence, because this happened in the middle of the night.
But the captain found his way to shore.
He found his way to shore. He
And
told
was
us,
making an event out of it
Right.
on media, right?
that's right, and he made up a story. Nobody knew it was a made-up story at the time because there is nothing to contradict it, but he said that there had been a squall that had broken the main mast of the ship. The mast had plunged down through the deck and down through the hull and broken gas lines, and a fire broke out, and everybody on the ship died but him. But then 3 days later...
Little did he know that this 11-year-old was floating in the ocean.
Right.
And ultimately got picked up by, a tanker?
A Greek freighter
Freighter.
sailing through the Providence Channel, which is a fairly wide and deep channel that runs through the Bahamas. And that's another uncanny part. There was a crewman on the deck of this freighter, and there were a lot of white caps around, and he was kind of casually looking around, and then he noticed a white cap in the distance that didn't disappear. And then he looked closer, and then he thought, gosh, it's a fisherman in a little boat. And he says, no, fishermen never come out this far. So he went to the captain and said, I think we should go look and see what that is. And they changed course, steamed over in that direction, and then came across this beautiful blonde child, barely conscious, in this life raft. And it was the picture, I mean, one of the crew took a picture of that, and it's on the cover of the book. And it's a quite dramatic picture because she was hours from death at that point. In fact, after she was brought on board the ship, and then after they helicoptered her to a hospital in Miami, she lost consciousness a few times and nearly died from, electrolyte imbalance and erratic heartbeat and so on.
And we did talk about the book years ago.
We did talk about the book years ago. Thank you for bringing it up again.
The name is Alone, and it's by Dr. Richard Logan, and it is available. And it's an incredible, as I described it, harrowing story. And bottom line, what happened to the captain?
Well, that's one of the really uncanny parts to it. When he came to shore, he reported to the Coast Guard that the ship had gone down in this story of the squall and the broken mast and the fire and everything. And and so they started, the Coast Guard held a hearing, and the second day of the hearing, I think it was, but it was 4 days after the boat disappeared. All of a sudden, there's a Coast Guard person comes rushing into the hearing room and reports that a little girl has been found. Says her name is Terry Jo Duperalt, and that she was on the Bluebell, which is the name of the boat that went down. The captain said, "Oh my God, what wonderful news," and then just walked out of the hearing room. And one of the Coast Guard officers says, "Captain, don't you want to stay? You have the right." And he just kept on going. The next morning, a maid was cleaning a room in a motel nearby and couldn't get the bathroom door open. There was a weird smell in there, and she asked somebody to come and help, and they pushed the door open, and there was the captain. He'd slashed his body in many, many really grotesque ways and had bled to death. And a lot of the Coast Guard officials and other people took this as an admission of guilt and a desire to escape the consequences and so on.
And that little girl today is a young woman.
Well, she's actually a grandmother.
Well, she's an older young woman.
She's young from our points of view, Alan.
Yeah.
But yeah, and she had...
Well, dirt is young from my point of view. So
she had a wonderful career with the Wisconsin DNR as a shoreline management specialist. And in 1993, I think it was, she was voted State Employee of the Year for the state of Wisconsin. And almost nobody who voted for her knew of her harrowing experience earlier in her life. But she grew up to be a remarkable human being. And in my work on solitary ordeals, I sometimes make a generalization that lots of times survivors of the worst kinds of ordeals end up being much better people than the rest of us. Take Elie Wiesel, for example, how powerful he has been as a moral leader, and he was a Holocaust survivor, Elie Wiesel,
who just
recently passed away.
Yeah, within the last 3-4 days.
That's right.
Author of Night, among many, many other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the great heroes of our age.
So, as the Society for Humanistic Judaism moves forward, its doors are open really to people of all persuasions. Is that correct?
That is correct. We have no test for admission. You do not have to go through any kind of a conversion ceremony. You simply express your interest, and you will find all of the Humanistic Judaism communities around the country, indeed around the continent and elsewhere in the world, very, very warm and welcoming and accepting.
There's a little bit of difference with the Minnesota organization, however, and that is the fact that there is a very active school.
That's right. Not every congregation has a school for its children. We do, and we're very proud of our school, which has been held up across the Society for Humanistic Judaism as a fine example of a school that teaches children about Jewish history and Jewish culture and Jewish values in a secular way, where there's solid evidence for, say, if you're teaching history and so on, that there's solid evidence, and we don't We don't. We do a lot of it based on archaeology and other sound findings that relate to Jewish history.
Well, it's interesting because nationally and even internationally, church memberships are dropping.
That's true.
And Jewish organizations also are diminishing in terms of the number of people who participate or belong as members, and there is a much larger secular area of the population than there used to be.
Yeah, there's a much larger secular component to the population, and also the millennials, the so-called millennials, don't tend to be joiners of organizations so much as they are interested in participating in an action or a cause. I think the fact that there's this growing number of secular people, if we just focus on the Jewish community, a growing number of secular people in the Jewish community provides a tremendous opportunity for the future of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. And again, we are the only existing congregational movement for secular Jews in existence anywhere. So, and we believe very much in the community model, in community matters, and I think a lot of these young millennials who don't care to join things nowadays are going to realize someday that they need a community.
And you do a lot of charitable work, I know. Mm-hmm. You're involved in civil rights and human rights.
Right.
And
that's
really
true. Social justice is a big part of what we stand for.
And based on the world as we see it
based on
today, social justice is something desperately needed.
And I'll add one other thing to that too, and I appreciate your making that comment, but I'll add one other thing. Given, given the state of our country today with all the divisiveness, secular organizations and secular institutions have never been more important. Because, it's a simple, you talk about, a fact that is obviously a fact. It is a simple fact that the institutions of governance in our society are thoroughly secular, if one reads the Constitution. And secular governance is one of the things that helps people of all different kinds of beliefs have their fair share of freedom to express their beliefs. And so I'm very proud to belong to an organization that is grounded so much in secular values and the secular view of the world.
And I thank you for coming in here today. Dr. Richard Logan, who has just a fascinating life and career. And as I said, the son of a Methodist minister who heads the National Society for Humanistic Judaism. And wrap that one around your head and try to figure it out. But fascinating life, interesting interview, and his book is Alone. So thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you. It's a real honor.